I wonder what your first thoughts were, what your feelings were when we just launched into Ezekiel 47, right in the middle of his vision. God's amazing unconditional love has been at work throughout history. Let's go back to 597 BC and follow this young man, a young man called to be a prophet to God's people in a time of both exile and hopelessness. Now, his message was hard to deliver. It was equally hard to receive. Judgment was coming to Jerusalem, and this would mean God's presence leaving the temple. Now, being God's people, having his presence with them, being in the holy city, formed their identity. It seemed that all hope was gone and that their relationship with God was a thing of the past. But God, our God, is a restorer, and he planned for a returning and gave Ezekiel an amazing vision. It was some 14 years later, and the vision was this, of the great temple and of God's glory entering the temple. These descriptions were no patch-up. They weren't like a common rebuild of something that once existed. Actually, 95 Bible verses are given over just to the description of the measurements involved. The vision of hope and of unconditional love is outlined wonderfully in Ezekiel 47. Shall we measure the enormity of God's ability to turn around hopelessness through unconditional love? It doesn't matter how far. The distance isn't important. No matter how far, God will reach. Now, many of you will know that I am a Manchester City football supporter. And as part of the initial notes for the sermon to do with this campaign, my colleague Chris mentioned a time when he lived in Manchester and went along to a guided tour of Manchester City Stadium. And he picked this one part out of that trip. It amazed him that at the side of the pitch, that the coach and the staff of Manchester City, the home team, had heated seats and the away contingency didn't, giving something of an advantage. Actually, the best part of the guided tour at the Manchester City Stadium is the trophy room. I had to drop that one in, really, didn't I? But the reason we're talking guided tours, the reason we're talking about something amazing like that is this, because Ezekiel was taken by God in this vision on a guided tour to beat all guided tours. The temple of God. As I said, it was no patch-up. It was no simple rebuild. The vision was being measured. The flow of God's restoration was envisioned through his river, through the river of God. Firstly, the vision was measured by the river coming up, the waters coming up to the ankles, and then up to the knees, and then up to the waist, and finally deep enough to swim in, and even too deep for some to cross it. Now, the vision isn't just about the returning of living water, but its replacement of the dead water. What a lovely picture that is. When God's restoration comes, when the river of God flows, not only does it bring life, but it deals with those things of death that have hung around someone's life and around the people of God in this instance, where they felt that the life of God had gone. He's taken to the view of the river emptying into the Dead Sea and becoming fresh again. What a picture of the lengths that God will go to, no matter how far. Now that goal is what motivates Gabriel. We'll see Gabriel in our film a little bit later. He is a specially trained community health worker. Every day he travels for miles, for hours on his motorbike, on the red dirt tracks of Mozambique, in the baking heat, to reach people in the most remote parts of Cabo Delgado. That is the region of Mozambique where we work most closely. The most northerly region of the nation. We'll see Gabriel later. There's another element of God's restoration. Not only is it not dependent on how far, it's never too far for God to go. It never matters how long it takes either. No matter how long. This river that Ezekiel saw in the vision was having an incredible effect. Verse 12 in Ezekiel 47 says this: their leaves will not wither, nor will their fruit fail. Every month they will bear, because the water from the sanctuary flows to them. Their fruit will serve for food, and their leaves for healing. Food and healing from the trees produced by this river. It gave hope no matter how long it had taken. Life was being restored. Food was being restored. Healing was coming. Restoration. Again in the film, we're going to see another person who this story can relate to so wonderfully in 2021 in Mozambique. We'll see a woman who has experienced rescue herself after a long and challenging wait. Her name is Zaina. She's a strong, confident woman from the village of Namachu in Cabo Delgado. She's a widow with 5 children and 13 grandchildren. Zaina first noticed discoloured patches on her skin nearly 30 years ago, when she was just a young mum. People in her village would laugh at her. But one day her life was turned around. By God's grace, a man found her, had compassion for her, and helped to build a hut for shelter from the rain. Later, that same man took her to a health post where she received the cure for leprosy. Now, meanwhile, leprosy change makers, people trained by the leprosy mission, went to this same village, the village of Namachu, to teach the villagers about leprosy and how it is easily cured. Now, Zaina had been trained as a leprosy change maker herself, and now she is making a difference too. She is passionate about finding those with leprosy who are hidden away and afraid, so that they can experience this new life and restoration, no matter how long it's taken. No matter what. So, no matter how far, no matter how long, no matter what needs the touch of God. Forgiveness was needed. The last verse in the book of Ezekiel is one full of triumph. This restoration of relationship between God and his people. The very last verse of the book says this, Ezekiel 48:35, from that day, the name of the city will be the Lord is there. That's what they'd been missing. God with them. God's presence. God there amongst them. And God's people had been exiled. Individuals had been exiled. No one is beyond God's redemption. No matter how far, how long, no matter what is needed. When I was growing up in a local church in Manchester, I remember one day a person in the church gave me a book. It was a book called The Cross and the Switchblade, and everybody was talking about it at the time. It was the Christian story of its day, but it's a story that will last forever because it's all about redemption. It's the story of a country pastor called David Wilkerson. He read an article about teenagers and criminal gangs in the city of New York, and so he moved there, risking his life to talk about Jesus to the young street gang members. One of these gang members, Nicky Cruz, was from a feared gang called the Mau Maus. David met Nicky and told him this: Jesus loves you and will never stop loving you. Nicky slapped him and said, I will kill you. And David replied this: yeah, you could do that. You could cut me into 1,000 pieces and lay them in the street, and every piece will still shout, I love you. Later, Nicky became a Christian, gave all of his weapons into the police and devoted his life to talking to others on the streets of New York about the love of Jesus. The power of God's unconditional love can change any life, no matter what has gone on, no matter what needs to happen to bring that change about. Our unconditional campaign this year is a picture of God's redemptive, healing river, reaching across the whole Mozambique region of Cabo Delgado. We are looking to build hubs that can affect communities, hubs of hope, hubs where there will be help and where the restoration of God can be felt. Just like in the village of Namachu, where the hub there now is the beating heart of that community. It's a safe space where every villager can be welcomed unconditionally. A place where those who can't read or write can learn about leprosy through drama, through song, and through dance. This is unconditional.